We spend so much of our lives trying to optimize performance, how we think, how we work, how we build wealth. But what if the real driver of performance isn't just individual capability, it's alignment? Alignment within ourselves and with the people around us. Today, I'm joined by neuroscientist Dr. Michael Mannino to explore the biology of synchrony, how our brains, bodies, and behaviors actually sync in real time. From dopamine and discipline to intuition and human connection, this conversation sits at the intersection of muscle, money, and mindset, and what it really takes to flourish in a world of increasing complexity and AI. But before we get to that, however, let's get to know Dr. Mannino a little bit. Michael Mannino is a neuroscientist, AI strategist, entrepreneur, and human performance expert who sits at the intersection of neuroscience, artificial intelligence, philosophy, and peak performance. Sounds like my kind of guy. He holds a PhD in neuroscience and a master's degree in philosophy, and his research has explored consciousness, embodied cognition, intuition, decision-making, and flow states. Michael is the co-founder and co-CEO of Synergy, an AI company using the science of interpersonal synchrony to improve team performance, collaboration, and trust. He also serves as Chief Science Officer at the Flow Research Collective, where he translates performance neuroscience into practical tools for leaders, teams, and high-stakes performers. He currently holds a position as Distinguished Research Fellow at the Center for Complex Systems and Brain Sciences at Florida Atlantic University. Previously, he held leadership roles including Director of the AI Center at Miami-Dade College and Director of Programs at the University of Miami's Institute for Data Science and Computing. Today, his speaking, advisory, and research work focuses on responsible AI, human flourishing, performance neuroscience, and how intelligent technologies are reshaping human cognition, collaboration, and decision-making. He's also very passionate about the science of communication, transhumanism, and exponential technologies, AI, and space science. He is currently serving on the Singularity University Miami chapter leadership team, and he used to work at NASA many years ago and even recently applied to be an astronaut. Michael's secret to lifelong happiness is learning, and some of his hobbies include playing chess, reading lots of books, playing guitar and piano for now over 30 years, traveling, studying, enjoying whiskey, and anything Star Trek. Boy, I think everybody wants to meet you. Dr. Mannino, thank you so much and welcome to the Flourish Feed podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So thank you for the long intro. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you're totally worthy of the long intro. You've done so much. You do so much. You're very, very engaged and clearly a charged up superhuman. So let's talk a little bit about the origin story of Dr. Michael Mannino. Before we get to the science, you've done work stemming from the discovery of the first neuromarker of human synchrony, which is pretty extraordinary. Who were you working with when it was discovered that humans can actually synchronize at a neurological level? Tell us a little bit about that.
The history goes back even farther than that. In the 80s, or maybe even before that, they started understanding how that certain parts of our biology can synchronize. But it wasn't until 2007 that, and I started my PhD a little while after that, about 2013. So my advisor, one of my advisors, his name's Scott Kelso. He's at the he founded the Center for Complex Systems and Brain Sciences at FAU and was really one of the godfathers of coordination dynamics and social neuroscience, the field of social neuroscience, what happens in our brains in social situations. And he discovered really the first neuromarker for when people are cooperating, they were doing a manual task, a physical task with their bodies versus competing. And so there's a specific neuromarker that he found. So he put EEG caps on two people and had them do a task together. And they were trying to cooperate in that task. And then in another experiment, they were trying to compete at that task. And he found one of the first people to scan multiple brains at one time, which is now all these years later, as a whole field of research called hyperscanning, and discovered the first neuromarker for synchrony when brains are getting in sync and doing this task together. He called it the phi complex. And
how do you spell phi? What is the word phi?
PHI. Yeah, phi complex from a Greek letter. And so the idea is that there's maybe folks know there's different brain waves and different brainwave patterns, right? There's alpha gamma, beta, theta, these different brain waves, mu. There's even other Greek letters that people aren't aware of that are just located in specific parts of the brain. And so he did find that. He found one neuromarker that is in the back of the brain over here that he called the phi complex. And there's a phi complex 1 for when people are doing the task and cooperating, trying to cooperate. And then there's another phi complex 2 when people are actually trying to compete. And that was the first
It's
neuromarker of synchrony
fascinating.
discovered, pretty much.
That is
Yeah.
fascinating. And since then, that was a while back,
Yeah.
the evolution of the study of that neuromarker must have expanded considerably because I mean, I remember watching your TED talk about synchrony from, I think it was last year. We see this in nature a lot. We see synchrony in nature a lot, but the idea of a completely detectable neuromarker or brainwave that shows when you're competing versus collaborating. What's
Yeah.
happened since then with that work? Because that sounds groundbreaking.
Yeah, it exploded. It exploded in now we're scanning multiple brains, not only two, but entire, for example, classrooms of kids learning together. And we found that there's a joint neuromarker for attention when kids are learning together. And that's actually a predictor of better grades,
Hmm. Wow.
better test taking abilities, better scores. There's all kinds of neuroscientists all over the world now in this whole field of hyperscanning that are studying all kinds of things. So, and not only with EEG, but we can put people in all kinds of scanners, and it's not only with brain waves; it's with heart rate variability, synchrony, movements, galvanic skin response. So the electrical activity on our skin can also synchronize, and that's actually a predictor of better cooperation. So it's emotional synchrony, cognitive synchrony, behavioral linguistic synchrony as well. And we've done it on, there's so many examples, teams, all kinds of different teams, classrooms,
I want to talk a
you
little
name
bit
it.
more about the classroom because that sounds like an incredibly, I mean, all of them are very powerful applications, but if you can prove that learning is taking place at a higher level because of a certain stimulus, that has to be an incredible tool for maybe remodeling a system that's in need of remodeling because the traditional education system of sitting at a desk and being told something. Tell me a little bit more about what that's done to modernize or maybe change perspectives on how education might work better.
That is an excellent question. Not much.
Mm,
That's a question in the field of educational neuroscience. So there's a whole field of research and
okay.
application called
Okay.
educational neuroscience. And part of that field tries to debunk some of the neuro myths that are out there when it comes to learning. Like, for example, people are ascribed being more left-brained or more right-brained, uh, that there are different modalities of learning like visual, auditory, kinesthetic. That's actually called the VAC paradigm or VAC method, VAK. And those educational neuroscience tries to find out what's the real science behind that and debunks a lot of those myths. But also from the other direction, it tries to use what it learns from neuroscience and apply that to pedagogical,
Mm,
educational contexts. And one of these is learning together. And the research is very young. I should say, like we
mm,
started talking about in the beginning of the conversation in
yes.
2007,
Yes.
and it's being applied. Synchrony, this idea of interpersonal synchrony, is being found in many different kinds of contexts, and we'll get into that. But still, it's still pretty young,
As it
and
and
it,
I would think this is a natural moment when we're questioning everything because of a new force coming at it called AI, that all of these different institutions and older models are probably ripe for rediscussion and renegotiation. Yeah.
so
That's very
absolutely,
exciting. That's very exciting. Yeah, because I mean, just even the paradigm of boys learn different than girls, or girls learn different things at a different age or different speed or what have you. All of that also seems rather anecdotal as opposed to purely based on a brainwave, like evidence that shows that something is either happening or not happening. That's cool.
yeah.
So, from a neuroscience perspective, because I think a classroom's a pretty interesting example of that, as is a corporate environment, but physical performance, cognitive performance, and relational performance Are they actually separate systems, or are they all governed by the same underlying biology? Because that's a perfect example of three different things that are happening to a kid in a classroom or happening to a person in a meeting, in a boardroom. So tell me a little bit about that.
I would say they're distinct domains, especially when they're being researched, but they rely on a lot of overlapping systems.
Mm,
Attention, arousal regulation, prediction, feedback, right? Motivation, all of these things, I would say those are overlapping systems that govern the brain and the body. So physical versus cognitive, and then we'll get into relational. But the body and the brain are not separate systems. They're not separate performance systems. This is the whole field of embodied cognition. How you move, how you breathe, how you focus, how you regulate stress, all feed into and how you interact with the environment, all feed into the brain and feed into cognitive systems. One great example is interoception. So interoception is the ability to be aware of what's going on inside your body, to be sensitive to your heartbeat, for example, or how your muscles are tense, or where there's heat in your
or
body,
your
or
temperature. Yeah, for
temperature,
sure.
things like
Yeah.
that. It's been shown, for example, that people who are more sensitive and their higher levels of sensitivity and accuracy in terms of their heartbeat, so that they can count their heart, they can feel their heart beating, just like sitting in the chair and counting that improves decision making. And so one of the biggest
Interesting.
cognitive processes, making fewer errors, problem solving better. So one of the biggest studies that came out showed that London stock traders on the trading floor, those who are more sensitive and have higher interoceptive accuracy and sensitivity, make better trading decisions, for
Really
example. Yes. So there's a very rich connection between the body and the brain and cognitive processes and physicality. When it
cool.
comes to relational performance, we rarely think about training, for example, the nervous system in terms of how we coordinate and cooperate with others, and adjust our behaviors in real time, to be able to make better decisions and
As a
problem
group,
as
yeah.
a group,
Is
right?
that historically referred to as empathy? Like what, or where does it, what's the origins of that kind of interoception
W- d-
superpower
yes, definitely empathy is part of it, and that's like the empathy is the social aspect, the
of
social
the other person as
relational.
opposed to the you? Yes, okay, the
Yes.
relational,
So
yes.
empathy is very interesting. There's different kinds of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, taking another's perspective, which shows up in one area of the brain. And then there's affective or emotional empathy, which is literally feeling how somebody else
Felt.
feels,
Wow.
which shows up in another part of the brain. Uh, and empathy is very, very connected to interpersonal synchrony. So people who can get into sync with others more easily, I guess I would say, if that's correct, it's a predictor of being able to take another's perspective better.
Mm. Is there
So,
ever a moment, I mentioned this, it's a bit off script from what I said I would talk about with you, but
it's
I
fine.
had some feedback when I was after doing an interview last week that the way that the person asking me the questions, the interviewer asked me the questions, I began to imitate his cadence. I began to imitate his physicality. And I realized, oh my gosh, I was mirroring somebody almost as a reflex to fit in, a reflex to make sure that we jived, that we had synchrony. Is there ever a case where you
Yeah.
shouldn't do that? Is there ever a use case for non-synchrony? It's off topic, but I
No,
think it's
no, just
fascinating.
directly on topic. So, yes, the too much synchrony too often can lead is not a good thing. So too much synchrony too often can lead to groupthink, everybody following the other,
Mm.
not enough diversity of thoughts and cognitive friction. You need those things for optimal team performance, better conflict resolution, coming to agreement and alignment, and all these things. So you really want to be able to. This is actually what Scott Kelso found in his original research. So this is a technical term in neuroscience or in social neuroscience called metastability.
Mm.
And Stephen Kotler, the
He likes that word
executive
too.
director and
Mhm.
founder of the Flow Research Collective, and my research partner, we're looking at metastability and a bunch of different things. So metastability is the ability to go in and out of synchrony optimally in the right context and in the right way.
Mm.
So coordination, you don't want to be too coordinated. You don't want to be too uncoordinated. There's a Goldilocks zone, and that's this idea of metastability. So there are times when you don't want to be in sync.
Fascinating. Wow. Okay. So many different applications of both of those ideas. Before I go on to further explore synchrony with you, I do want to have a little bit of a geek out moment about neurochemistry and neurotransmitters, and specifically dopamine. That's one that we talk about a lot. I think a lot of people, now that it's been used frequently in common parlance for years, are starting to become more aware that it's a thing and that we make it automatically based on certain responses to things. But what role does it actually play in motivation, and is it tied to pursuit as opposed to satisfaction? A lot of people, think of themselves as dopamine junkies. They're people that need to jump out of planes, but I think that might be a misnomer. Tell me the actual scientific definition of the role that dopamine plays.
Well, that's complicated because it changes all the time. I'm reading new studies about dopamine all the time. It's one of the most well-studied neurotransmitter neurotransmitters. And yeah, but that's exactly right. Traditionally, dopamine is involved in movement, right? Think about Parkinson's disease, the degeneration of dopamine neurons in the substantia nigra in the deep part of the brain in the basal ganglia. So it's involved in movement, which if you think about it, that's you want to move toward the thing that you're motivated to do. And so it's involved in motivation. It's less about reward, what we found, and pleasure, and more about, as you're saying, wanting, pursuit, putting in the right amount of effort, learning what's worth going after. So it's more about assigning value, I would say, to the thing that you're motivated to do, and it creates a feedback loop to get you to do that thing. It can be hijacked, of course, by like a lot of different things, novelty, extrinsic motivators, right? Because that's the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And we talk about that in terms of performance and human performance. But so it can be high, your brain can't tell the difference. So it can be from a dopamine, from a psychological point of view, yes, this is an extrinsic motivator, this is an intrinsic motivator, but from a dopaminergic point of view, it's difficult to tell that difference. So yeah, it's dopamine we see spikes in things like anticipation,
Mm,
uncertainty, pursuit of certain things, less about, satisfaction and or less about the reward and more about the satisfaction. Although that involves other systems too, but
oh,
there's a lot of talk about dopamine fasting and dopamine detoxing and from a neurobiological perspective, that's a misnomer. There's no such thing. You can't get rid of dopamine in your brain. You can change the way it activates. You can change the context that it activates. So context is everything in the brain. Think about going to a horror movie, right? We love going to horror movies, right? We love being afraid in the right
some of
context.
us do.
It's pleasurable, right? Well, okay, well, you look at the movie industry, right?
The empathy people out here aren't loving it so much because we feel everything that's going on. But yes, go ahead.
And that might be trainable in terms of taking out the affective part, the emotional synchrony,
Hmm.
right? And putting in the perspective taking cognitive aspects. But yes, so like, if things are done in the right context, you're in a safe environment,
Yes.
then you can experience the amygdala still activates the threat detection, but the response of fear is a higher top-down cognitive whole brain thing that
Ah,
creates a narrative and a story because the brain is a prediction engine. So to get back to the point of dopamine and context, that's the point here is that you need the dopamine to activate in your brain in the right kind of context. People want to like remove these things that dopamine, and that's the wrong way of thinking.
mm,
My point here is that we need dopamine to activate in the right way so we can be motivated, so we can accomplish goals, so we can be
right.
happier, right? And ultimately,
I remember when I did some of the programs with Flow Research Collective, and they did use terms like dopamine detoxing. It was that our exposure to screens and to constant stimulus and to social media and all that was causing us to become numb to it so much so that dopamine detox became a valid idea. And it wasn't so much that we were detoxing from dopamine, we were detoxing from the things that cause us to have that physical or cognitive response. Is that still fair to say?
correct.
Yes,
Yeah, no,
it's still fair
absolutely.
to say. Okay.
Dopamine desensitization.
Yes, that's a better way of saying it. Yes, agreed.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so the question I want to come back to is I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about what would have to be true about the human brain. You know, I come from wealth management, which has a little arm of itself called investment management. What would have to be true about the human brain for us to be legitimately good at timing the markets? And so that I think back to you mentioned a few minutes ago, the people on the floor of the London Stock Exchange who have strong interoception. They have a very, solid connection with themselves and their own heart rate. They're more sensitive to probably information. They're probably more sensitive to outward and inward information. So my question really is about the metastability of those guys on the floor of the London Stock Exchange and their relationship with their dopamine. Can you tell us the story of that as it relates to making great, because those guys would be making great stock market decisions, right? And they obviously have something solid going on biologically that's allowing them to do that. Can you tell it through the lens of the metastability and the dopamine as well?
Yeah, well, it's all about decision making. And in this case, the markets are their own thing. They're mind independent, they're objective. It's been said, my partner of my company, Urban Valencia, used to do a lot of trading, and he likes to say that the market is a heuristic for people's sentiment.
Mm,
So there is an objective complexity about the way the market works. What you're asking here is what's going on in the brains that allows those brains to time those decisions in the right way along with the market. So yeah, the it goes back to decision making, and I would say it goes back to this idea of the brain being a prediction engine.
mm,
Right. So I mentioned that just a few minutes ago. That's what the brain is. It's a Bayesian updating thing, right? It makes its best guess. That's what the word Bayesian means here about what the world is what kinds of information is going to come into the brain. It's a prediction engine, and it has certain priors,
mm,
models, assumptions that you have in your brain and in your mindset and in the way you frame things and biases, right? Stephen talks about this and Peter Diamandis talk about this quite a bit in their new book. I'm going to plug it right here. I see it on your
mm.
shelf. What
Yeah,
we
there
are
it is.
this idea of these priors and models and assumptions that the brain interprets incoming sensory information. So it can do one of two things, by the way, so anyway, it makes those predictions. Let me back up here. It makes those predictions, and then sometimes it predicts right, and then sometimes there's an error, a
Mm,
discrepancy. So what the brain wants to do is minimize that uncertainty, minimize the surprise, minimize the error. And it can do those in two ways. One way it can change those assumptions and priors and models, and it can also then change the world. Well, in the markets, and I'm sort of just thinking aloud here, right?
yeah.
As it trying to bring all my neuroscience to bear on this idea. In one sense, you're not going to change the markets and how they work. That's a higher level upward, different causal mechanisms that are large scale at play there. But what you can do is you can change the way your brain makes those predictions. And it's been shown very eloquently and carefully that the brain can make better predictions and decisions if it's attuned to what's going on in the body.
Mm,
And so this is where embodied cognition and interoception come into play. As I mentioned, people who have higher levels of interoceptive sensitivity and accuracy not only have higher levels of mental health, lower depression, lower anxiety, better well-being, better quality of life. That's been shown. Higher, and I'll get to this in a second, but higher activity of the vagus nerve.
mm. Yes, we should
Okay.
talk about that.
We'll
Mhm.
talk about that, but also better cognitive systems. So better mood, better decision making, better creativity,
Is that
calmer.
is that through the fascia? Like, how does that happen? Is it the whole body? Because I understand the fascia to be almost like a really elaborate brain neural network of covering of the muscle. And I'm fascinated by this idea that the more in touch you are with your muscle or your corpus, your body, as you say, the better decision making discipline you have. Yeah, keep going. I'm just fascinated by this.
Yes, it is partially. I wouldn't say it's directly dependent on the muscle tissue, the fascia, the ligaments. In fact, Stephen and I recently argued, which got a lot of controversy, a paper
Mm,
on this as well, which we could get into. The body does not keep the score, was the
right.
title of the paper. We argued that it's more about metastability in the brain.
Mm,
It's really through the connection between the body and the brain, and mostly through the vagus nerve.
Okay.
So the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, and 80% fibers of the vagus nerve go from the body to the brain. 20% go the other way down. So
Wow.
most of the information is coming, up from the body, and it's interpreting those signals. And if the vagus nerve is the nerve that regulates the parasympathetic nervous system, so that
Yes.
and digests, calm. We can make better decisions when we're calm, and we can, or in a better mood, and so on. So the idea that and I just had another thought too. The vagus nerve translates all of those signals coming from the body. One of the biggest signals that it translates is the enteric nervous system, which is the gut nervous system. And so that literally, people say it's your second brain. It kind of is, because there's millions, hundreds of millions of neurons in the brain, in the gut. 90% of the serotonin in your body is made in the gut and then
Really?
signals to the brain. Yeah, so it's most of the serotonin in your system is in your gut, not
I
in your
had
brain.
no idea. That's just to remind everybody, the serotonin is it is a calming, it is one that allows you to feel
Mood,
relaxed, mood, like a better
relax,
mood.
better
Yes.
mood, yeah, which and so it's taking those signals from your gut and
Interesting.
interpreting those signals.
I didn't
So
know about the 80/20 blend of how the vagus nerve interacts with the body. I mean, I knew it was an important member of the passageway of information, but that 80/20 part, and then also the 90% of serotonin in the body produced by the gut, those are pretty powerful numbers about how being connected to the rest of your body will generate better decision making. Like there's so much there.
yes, absolutely. The very rich literature, scientific literature about this idea of embodied cognition, which we've done research on as well. There's a study, also just to drive home the point here, there was a study done showing that they could predict whether you had schizophrenia with like 99% accuracy by just looking at the bacteria in your fecal matter.
Really? Because that's a direct relation to what's happening in your gut.
Yeah. So schizophrenia is a pathology of the brain and brain networks and network dynamics, but it can be predicted so well by looking at, what's happening in your
What's
gut.
happening in the gut.
Yeah, there's a very rich connection there.
Fascinating. All right, we got to move to synchrony now because that is, after all, why we're here. We've talked a lot about the individual human. We've talked about the systems, the brains, the body, the nervous system, but moving over to how we behave in groups. When people train together or compete together or build together, do their motivational systems begin to align? And I think the answer is yes, because you've told me their biology begins to align, but maybe I've got that a little simplified. Tell me about that.
No, that's exactly right. So let's take it from a higher level model and cognitive and psychological model, from motivation. Yes, motivations, it's called shared goal commitment or collective ambition. So one of the biggest researchers in team flow or group flow, but let's say team flow, which is the collective state of flow when you're actually performing, I would say. His name is JJ Vandenhout. We've done some research with him, and wrote a textbook on team flow, and he has a model of team flow. And in the center of the model is this idea of collective ambition, so shared goal commitment. We're looking at this at the level of the neuroscience, level of the brain, and psychophysiology, which I'll explain in a second. But yeah, there absolutely are alignment of psychologies and motivations and higher level cognitive thinking. That so people on the same page, they have familiarity of each other, they have the equal knowledge, there's open communication. These are all these factors that come into play that share prerequisites, you might say, for team flow. And that is it's a prerequisite. It's very important for team flow. And we've now shown, and other researchers, that you can also look at what causes that from like physiological and like neurobiological mechanisms.
What happens first, though? The shared goal or the I guess
Both,
it depends how often you work together, maybe.
yeah, that's also part of it. So lots of studies have shown that. So this idea of interpersonal synchrony, brainwaves synchronizing, heart rate synchronizing, galvanic skin response, movements, all these things that we mentioned, pupils and things like that, all of those things are, when they synchronize, they're a predictor. There's a very strong predictor of things like psychological safety,
Mm,
trust, better communication, cooperation, empathy, pro-sociality, generosity. So when those things, and synchrony causes those things to happen. So, and it's been shown that people like teams, for example, who can get into sync, perform better. Literally, their brain waves, everything, they perform better. They make fewer errors.
yeah.
They have better feedback systems. So all of these things manifest. And so really so the synchrony causes those other things. But if teams
Yes.
can learn to do
Exactly.
those other things, they
Totally.
can get into sync better.
Yeah,
That's
my relationship with this originally, before I even studied flow, before I even read Stephen's books or anything to do with team flow, I was
Mhm.
a competitive CrossFit athlete and I used to
Oh,
compete on team. And when you do team CrossFit or any kind of team, but certainly something that's short, intense, bursts, where everything has to be done wicked fast with high precision,
right.
you figure out how to sync, right? And it was not only not only helpful, not only did it do the job, but it was also incredibly satisfying to be in that state of
Um,
synchrony. So
yes.
tell me a little bit about the satisfaction part of synchrony, because I mean, it sounds like as mammals or animals or whatever, this is what we're built to do.
Correct.
Maybe it's just been that we've been overthinking it for too long, or we went off the road for a little bit because of technology and whatever, and now we're coming back together towards learning that synchrony
Yes.
is helpful. But talk to me about the satisfaction layer and, yeah, the fact that maybe we're just built to do this.
That's right. And this gets back to this point about spontaneous synchrony versus intentional
Mm,
synchrony. So we know about, like, we're built, evolutionarily speaking, this it's a mechanism to work together better, to cooperate more, to collaborate, right? And to communicate. But then from the top down, from the learned side of things, yes, we can learn habits, behaviors, and we can make it intentional so that we can synchronize. And then that has downstream effects into a better performance and all these other things. So, and yes, it does feel good, right? We love being in sync with each other. It's a very pleasurable response. Stephen and Peter, in their book "Future is Faster Than You Think," I think their last one, they talk about, like, and Stephen talks about this all the time, right? Group flow is one of the happiest, most pleasurable things in the world, right? And that's because all of these chemicals, these neurotransmitters,
yeah,
oxytocin, serotonin, anandamide, all of these things that manifest in the brain during flow, get amplified in team flow.
and team flow. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about team flow, a recent study came out. We didn't do this, but Mohammed Shahada did this at Caltech, very recent, a couple of years ago, showed that for the first time, there's only like a handful of studies, but this was the first one, that team flow is a unique brain state that we've now showed. For example, we've now showed that flow is a brain state. We can look at flow at the level of the brain and match that with people's lived experience, the
Mm-hmm.
subjective felt phenomenological experience of flow. Same thing now with team flow. He put people into teams, and he matched their talents and their goals and these kinds of things in the experimental protocol, and found that team flow is a unique brain state that doesn't exist in any one brain. So it's not just the additions of everybody's in flow in your team. Hey, let's no, it's more than it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So now it's
Literally.
an
Wow.
emergent
Wow.
state where it's a higher level emergent state. It's a property of the system,
Yeah.
not of individuals. It's a property of the team. And we've shown that at the brain, and parts of the brain that are involved in that were reward parts, just like in regular flow, individual
Interesting.
flow, reward parts, the intrinsic motivation parts and these kinds of things. So it's a very pleasurable experience to get into sync with others.
This might be a side street visit on a philosophical level, or it might be on a level of evolution. But at the very beginning, we talked about the difference in brain state between people who are cooperating versus people who are competing.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about what we just said as it relates to team flow, and that being a state where the sum is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Where did we go wrong with becoming competitive? Like, it seems to be a huge part of how the system operates as well. And yet, so much more is possible if we are in sync and working with others. The competitive thing, is that a me? Is that an I, and the synchrony is a we? Or you know where I'm trying to go with
Yeah,
this?
I think so. What I would say is, and I don't know if I'm answering the question here, but this is where my brain is going. Like competition is good,
Yeah.
right? So collaboration is great. Competition is good because it brings out the best in folks,
Hmm.
and can argumentation, for example, is good because we can take others' perspectives I think again back to this idea of context. And I want to mention two things here. So context, like back in the horror, seeing a horror movie, or if you're seeing a lion
Mhm.
through a cage or a glass wall in a zoo versus
In the wild.
God in the wild,
Yeah.
right? So
Mm.
context matters. And I think competition could be good in the right context. Context is everything in the brain. So I think getting out of sync, what Scott Kelso found was that there's this other phi complex that shows up when people are competing. And it's the metastability of going out in sync that is optimal for better collaboration and
Mm.
performance.
Mm.
But I would say that there are times when it calls for competition and disagreement
Yes.
in order to be able to build and
Agreed. Okay.
so on. So,
That makes sense. That being able to oscillate between both states, the metastability or
yes,
the metas the metastability to be able to oscillate between both states is what can allow for progress, because otherwise we could be stuck in synchrony doing the same thing, but not necessarily advancing the cause or building a new idea or changing. Okay, I'll buy that. I
sy
totally buy that. There are
synchrony
two
is
useful parts of the brain,
cor
the competitive
correct.
one, the cooperative one.
That's right, that's right. I will say, like, all of these studies that are coming out, like, on a weekly basis on interpersonal synchrony are so important, and they show that synchrony is a predictor of all of these positive things.
Mm,
Some of them look at going in and out of synchrony. That's this coordination. A recent study, very recent, came out about a month ago, showing that elite esports teams were better at winning and had more wins that were able to get in sync. So they measured heart rate variability, their heart rate variability. So if the team was synchronizing their heart rate variability and they could all get calm together at the right moment to make a decision, they were much more likely to win.
mega
Elite,
brain. One big
yes,
mega brain. Yeah.
mega brain because it
Yeah.
gets into sync. So yeah, I mean, there's all this evidence.
Amazing. So now this is a perfect segue to talk about synergy, which, in addition to being you're a neuroscientist, you're also an innovator and an entrepreneur. Tell us about what synergy does and how it's having an impact on the world of remote work and any other domains that you're doing some work in.
So Synergy is a AI-based, AI-driven platform that uses behavior design and applied neuroscience to measure and quantify when teams get in sync.
Okay.
And
Just like the esports athletes.
just
Yes.
like the esports athletes, exactly. And then it also has a mechanism to provide behaviors and habits and activities and tactics that teams can do to move the needle on all those things. So we're using AI to measure just with the webcam and the microphone. We're just using those two things. So it's completely like contactless and non-invasive. It's a platform that looks at remote teams right now, distributed teams, because we're into this remote world. But even, teams that are like in the same building on campus of an educational institution are still part of teams and they meet during Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So we're using these platforms to actually capture data about our teams and the way they work. So we're using AI to look at those teams and improve team performance to fix the broken dynamics as we moved out of COVID and we moved into a remote slash hybrid world that you lose some of these things,
Yeah.
eye contact and subtle cues and embodied interactions that are so powerful and below conscious awareness to get us into sync, that spontaneous synchrony. So we're trying to deploy AI in this platform to be able to get teams, remote teams to collaborate better, to solve problems quicker,
Yes.
to make better decisions, to have more creative
Feel more
output.
connected to their work, feel more satisfied with the outcomes. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah,
All that
exactly.
stuff.
So Yeah, we're looking at corporations and enterprise founders, teams of startups, and we're actually we're not directly trying to measure team flow, but Synchrony is such a predictor of team flow. We actually did this study in collaboration with FRC and Stephen Kotler to look at, is team synchrony in remote teams correlated to team flow? And the results are early, but they're powerful. We actually found that yes, productivity increases, psychological safety and trust, shared goal commitment, all and synchrony rise and correlates. And there's a positive correlation between the team's ability to get into sync and their experience of team flow.
Which means you'll get the 500% more productive McKinsey study numbers from that kind of behavior, which you
Correct.
might not be able to get from remote work otherwise. And was it
Correct.
COVID that caused this
It
feeling
was.
that you needed to invent?
It was a big factor at play. So my PhD research was in this field, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast here, like we talked about Scott Kelso, and so my research was in this synchrony research and how brain areas talk to one another and how different brains talk to one another. So you've heard the phrase, by the way, that neurons that fire together wire together. There's also a phrase that Michael Platt at the University of Pennsylvania, he's another colleague of mine, neuroscientist, has the brains that fire together wire together. So my research was in that, and then I met my partner Erwin Valencia, who met him through Flow Research Collective and Stephen Kotler, and about 5 years ago now. And his expertise was also in collaboration, team coaching, team performance. Came out of Columbia, did the applied neuroscience stuff there, and so yeah, we had this idea of like, oh, now we can maybe use AI to predict and also get people in sync
Yeah.
because of this remote world that we're living in now. So it was right out of COVID.
That is remarkable and such a powerful idea to take a state of work that, whether we still need to be working remotely or not. I work in an office, but a lot of the people that are in this office will still prefer to work remotely on some days. They work hybrid. And it has fundamentally changed the way that you relate to other people. And I think part of the strategy that Synergy offers you is still retaining the importance of gathering. Right? Even if it's remote gathering is essential to create that team flow. And then if it can be measured and it can be even prompted and coached. But
Correct.
a lot of the remote work that seems to have also spun out of COVID is fewer gatherings, like fewer physical gatherings, but also fewer virtual gatherings. So I think it's really important that what you're doing is you're bringing back into corporate culture this necessity to gather.
Yeah, is exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. So we can also use the platform for coaching, for example, is another really good use case. Esports, we talked about that too, but there's a bunch of use cases. But coaching is really powerful because now we have online coaching, and you can actually capture some of the synchrony, and that's also been shown. By the way, I didn't even mention that, but in psychotherapy, in the field of psychotherapy, clients that get into sync with their therapists, brain waves, movement, language, heart rate, respiratory rate, all of these things synchronized, that's actually a predictor of better therapeutic
Patient.
alliance and patient outcomes.
Yeah.
So coaching can also be a great use case for, we're finding that as well, for like getting into
Very good.
yeah.
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 And more, that kind of therapy, I think, is not to say that it wasn't always normalized, but it was often not talked about. And it is becoming much more acceptable for people to access those tools and those resources and those professionals to add that layer of, here's how we can make sure, Dr. So-and-so, that you get the most ideal outcomes from your clients is to look for these things and have these tools and know what you're looking for. That's even better, especially in a relatively disconnected world. I mean, we still a relatively disconnected world. Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And even it's weird with all globalization and the social media, loneliness is an epidemic now. And also it's just as bad as you hear, like smoking and all these things, right? It's incredible. So the exact opposite of that is human connection.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really trying to do at Synergy is measure biologically human connection, engender it, foster it, promote it, enhance it. And what can be measured can be managed, everybody knows, but going beyond that, giving people the tools and the behaviors to practice and the habits, the things to do the applied part of it is so important to move the needle on all these things. So, and that, like you said earlier, can be trained.
This is going to take me into my last question, which has to do with AI. But before I get to that, I wanted to ask if in your coaching work, when you're offering teams feedback on how it is that they can grow their synchrony and they can grow their or recognize signs of it, if there are people out there that are listening to this who have maybe predominantly digital relationships, maybe their kids live somewhere else in the world and they miss feeling that synchrony with them, they miss feeling connected to them. What are some of the signs that you can look for in a relationship that might be digital or it might be physical, but it might in person? But what are some of the signs of synchrony that present that say, all right, you've synced up with this person?
Oh, yeah. So matching your tone to the person, asking open-ended questions, eye contact, understanding what kind of conversation you're having in the first place. So is it a decision-making conversation, an emotional conversation? These are recognizing what kind of conversation you're having, a perspective-taking conversation, an agreement, maybe it's more about conflict resolution. So is it an open-ended brainstorming kind of conversation, and how that shifts over the conversation? I will mention that a book was recently written called Super Communicators, and it was written by Charles Duhigg. And the first two chapters are all about the science of synchrony and interpersonal synchrony. So now also 4,000 Weeks is another wonderful book. Oliver Burkham, I forget the last name, but he also talks about synchrony. So you're finding this concept in all of these popular New York Times bestsellers and so on. And in those books, they talk about these kinds of things, right? So listening to music together,
Mm,
these breathing together actually also can engender synchrony. Feeling gratitude together, having vulnerable, open conversations, which can engender emotional synchrony,
yes,
physiological synchrony. So there are ways to intentionally train it and foster
brilliant.
synchronous conversations. So
Excellent. It's interesting because I've been at a number of all exclusively women's events in the last 6 months since the beginning of the year. And never in my life have I, with such consistency, been in a room with 50 to 100 women where frequently throughout the day, someone says, let's all stand up and breathe together. Or let's all stand up and, follow this movement at the front, almost like a Jane Fonda aerobics class, but
yeah,
circa 2026, right?
yeah.
And it's becoming normalized, it's becoming popularized to have that kind of group intervention, if you will, or that moment where everybody kind of syncs up and you re-find each other. And I think it's lovely. I think it's awesome. The
Yeah.
the sort of darker side of this that I think is interesting that I wanted to just talk about in closing is how when we talk to a chat or a Claude, specifically a chat, I think for me anyway, and they seem to be syncing with you. They seem to be,
Mm,
they understand your tone. Maybe they're very flattering. Maybe they're doing those things like they're not breathing and having a heart rate per se, but they are trying to understand where this conversation is going. Tell me
mm.
a little bit about the AI side of synchrony in your opinion. And if that's too uncomfortable, you could just tell me how you're excited about the use of AI for what you do.
Gosh. Okay. So what I would say is, and I actually mentioned this in my TED talk, I believe this concept of human AI synchrony
Hmm.
and how that can be used to foster flow and the intersection between AI and flow, which is very interesting. But I would say, so this idea of AI being sycophantic or sycophancy, right? Which these models,
Flattering. Yes.
flattering, the models are designed that way for sure. Rightly so, because they want to keep people using the platform. So but it's also has a dark side as well. And it's actually been shown, studies have shown now that people lose their own voice. They lose their own, if there's automation bias, which is just being more likely to accept AI as output, and it affects your decision making and other cognitive processes. So it's very real phenomenon. And in that way, that you're making me think like that kind of synchrony of agreement, which is not necessarily synchrony, but or alignment, I would say, of AI aligning with you can be dangerous, right? And
Hmm.
there's all kinds of cognitive offloading, automation bias, loss
Over
of
trusting
agency,
it.
over
Yeah. People who've actually lost their chats and then the chat bot comes back and has a totally different tone and they feel like the person on the other end is, you know,
right.
gone, like
There's
there's
a
a
model
loss.
or yeah,
Yes.
yeah, something happens and correct. So in that sense, this is more of like, I would say, a linguistic synchrony, which is, by the way,
Mm,
very indicative of cognitive alignment.
yeah,
So that's a well-studied phenomenon. And so this is not like mimicking the brain waves and the heart rates, and because AI doesn't really have that, not yet. Uh, the eye contact, right? Not yet. These kinds of things. So it's more of like the behavioral side of things and the linguistic side of things where AI can synchronize. And it's now recommended to ask AI to challenge your assumptions. There's
right.
different prompting techniques to get more output and have more of a better creative output
Yeah.
to and have more agency. So that's directly not, and you want AI to not align with you to be able to.
Have that competitive fight to go back and say, no, we need to do better. Yeah, that's right.
Competition is good, right?
Yeah,
AI
exactly.
be competing with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a very real concern, I would say there. Yeah, I would, however, say that if we can learn to and design and deploy AI systems, future AI systems, and current ones too, to understand. See, this is the thing. It's been actually been shown that AI right now, actually, one of the massive gaps in large language models is that they don't understand social interaction, human social interaction. There's a gap there. And that's why people are looking for all kinds of different data sets to be able to train future models. AI fails on other things too, spectacularly, right? This is the whole ARC AGI prize, like the in artificial general intelligence, that humans and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds can do things. They have intuition, theory of mind, and things like that can perform really well. AI fails spectacularly, right? So I would say, in order to be able to design AI systems that can recognize and
Mm,
predict and truly understand human social interactions and the way we synchronize with each other, that will be great for not only AI alignment
hmm.
and getting AI to align with human values, but also for better cooperation and output in human AI symbiosis.
Yes. So when we have the episode all about communicating with your digital twin, I'll have you back and we can talk about that, because I imagine that the more we go down the road of virtualizing ourselves, of doubling ourselves and creating other versions of ourselves, the
Yes.
more that learning can take place, right? Because now we're creating actual models that are very driven by an actual human sample, and that would be a real turning point, I think, if
Our-
we had that.
back to social neuroscience, right?
Yeah,
AI right now works in very similar ways, also distinct ways in terms of how the human brain works. We all know that large language models predict the next token. It actually, a study just came out last week showing, yeah, you know what? That's what brains do as well in very real ways. So there are similarities, and I think, to your point, is when we move over to virtual, digital, computational selves, aspects of ourselves that are that's my AI avatar as part of the team, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Now, right, which is people are already thinking about and working on having AI to be able to understand how humans connect better, and will be so beneficial for future AI systems and how we collaborate with them.
Absolutely. And better for all of us because of it. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you for giving us such great, thorough, huge, concrete language and knowledge that we can use to try and sync up better with the people in our world, whether they be virtual or with us in the room. Thank you so very much for chatting with me today, and I wish you the best day.
Thank you so much, Gillian. It was a pleasure talking with you. Amazing conversation.
Right on.